The old house groaned. Eleanor, a woman whose life revolved around order and cleanliness, stood frozen. Her eyes, magnified by thick spectacles, darted towards the pantry door. Something moved in the shadows. A flicker. Gone. Eleanor prided herself on her immaculate home. Not a speck of dust dared to settle. Not a dish dared to remain unwashed. The very notion of a creature, an intruder in her domain, sent a shiver down her spine, a shiver that quickly morphed into a cold, hard knot of determination. It began innocently enough, a crumb out of place, a faint musky odor. She dismissed it at first, but deep down, a seed of unease had been planted. The hardware store held a strange allure that day. Eleanor, usually repulsed by the grime, found herself drawn to the pest control aisle. Her eyes scanned the shelves, taking in the traps and poisons. She settled on a simple wooden snap trap. Back home, her hands trembled as she baited the trap. The snap was surprisingly loud. Eleanor, startled, cautiously approached the trap. There lay a small, lifeless form. A wave of nausea washed over Eleanor, replaced by satisfaction. Little did she know the war was just beginning. The initial victory was short-lived. More droppings appeared, the scratching sounds returned, bolder now, mocking her. Eleanor, her lips pressed into a thin line, doubled down. She purchased more traps, this time a variety, each one a testament to her growing obsession. The snap of the traps became a regular symphony in the old house. Each kill brought a fleeting sense of relief, quickly replaced by a gnawing anxiety. Eleanor, once content with simple cleanliness, now saw enemies everywhere. Every shadow held a potential threat. Every creak of the floorboards sent her heart racing. The house, once her sanctuary, became a battleground. And Eleanor, the once meticulous housekeeper, transformed into a ruthless hunter. The internet became her accomplice. Hours were spent scouring online forums, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she absorbed every bit of information about rodent extermination. She learned about new poisons, more potent and deadly. She discovered the cruel efficiency of glue traps, reveling in the terrified struggles of the captured mice. Her methods grew increasingly sadistic. Driven by an insatiable need to inflict pain, she began toying with her prey. She would trap them, not killing them outright, but leaving them to suffer. The once organized pantry, now stacked high with traps and poisons, resembled a macabre workshop. Lost in her world of traps and death, she had become consumed by her own twisted game. The hunter in her pursuit of control had become the monster. Unbeknownst to Eleanor, her reign of terror had not gone unnoticed. Within the walls of the old house, a different kind of life stirred. The mice, their numbers dwindling, began to whisper amongst themselves. Tales of the woman and her cruelty spread like wildfire. Fear, primal and raw, pulsed through the small colony. They had always feared the humans, but this woman was something different. She was a force of nature, a harbinger of death. The air hung heavy in the attic, thick with dust motes, dancing in the pale moonlight filtering through a cracked window. In the center of the room, on a floorboard worn smooth by time, the mice gathered. Not just any mice, but the elders, their fur as gray as the dust, coating their ancient meeting place. Tonight they faced a threat unlike any they had encountered. Tonight they would invoke a power unknown to their kind, a power whispered in legends passed down through generations. The eldest, his whiskers trembling slightly, held aloft a tiny object, a withered claw black as night, said to belong to their ancestral protector, the Rat King. The air crackled with unseen energy. As the chanting reached a fever pitch, the claw in the elder's hand began to glow, casting an eerie green light on the surrounding mice. The light spread, creeping across the floorboards until it hit a section of the wall. The dust-covered wallpaper peeled back, revealing ancient markings etched into the wood beneath. The markings pulsed with the same green light, swirling patterns that seemed to writhe and shift before their eyes. A collective gasp, a tiny wave of sound, rippled through the gathered mice. This was the forbidden knowledge, passed down through generations, whispered only in hushed tones. The elders, their faces illuminated by the eerie glow, fell silent, their chanting ceasing abruptly. They looked upon the markings with a mixture of awe and trepidation. The attic grew colder. The air, already thick with anticipation, now crackled with static electricity. The markings on the wall pulsed brighter, the green light casting grotesque shadows that danced across the gathered mice. And then, slowly, a shape began to form in the center of the circle. It began as a wisp of smoke, a distortion of the air. Then it coalesced, taking on a more defined form. A spectral form, vaguely rat-like, towered over them, its eyes glowing with an eerie red light. The Rat King had answered their call. The elders, however, stood their ground, their fear outweighed by a desperate hope. The pact had been made. Outside, the world had transformed into a tempestuous fury. Wind howled like a banshee. Rain lashed against the windows of the old house, mirroring the turmoil brewing within its walls. Inside, Eleanor slept, a restless sleep plagued by nightmares of beady eyes and razor-sharp teeth. She dreamt of being hunted, her pursuers a legion of shadows with glowing red eyes. They swarmed around her, their tiny claws scraping against her skin, their hot breath tickling her ears with silent threats. Unbeknownst to her, in the dusty attic above, the pact was being sealed. The spectral form of the Rat King, its red eyes burning with an infernal light, pulsed with an energy that seemed to seep into the very structure of the house. The time for all-out war had arrived. The fear that had once gripped the mice now morphed into a different beast. Fueled by the Rat King's power, it spread through the house like wildfire. Spiders abandoned their webs, fleeing in terror. cockroaches scattered at the mere whisper of the Rat King's name. The house groaned under the weight of the encroaching darkness. Eleanor, oblivious, remained trapped in her nightmare. Morning arrived, not with the gentle caress of sunlight, but with a gray, oppressive heaviness that seemed to press down on the old house. The storm had passed, leaving behind an eerie silence, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of water from the eaves. Eleanor, her face pale and drawn, moved through the house like a ghost. She tried to ignore the unsettling feeling that had taken root in her gut, the sense that something was terribly wrong. But the house, her once familiar domain, now felt alien, hostile. Objects seemed to be out of place. Shadows seemed to writhe at the edge of her vision. Then came the messages. At first, she dismissed them as her sleep-deprived mind playing tricks on her. A word scrawled on the bathroom mirror in toothpaste: fear. Nightfall descended, cloaking the old house in an oppressive darkness. Eleanor, her nerves frayed to the breaking point, sat huddled in the living room, every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of wind against the windows, sending shivers down her spine. The messages had stopped, but their silence was more terrifying than any threat. Outside, the wind picked up again, whistling through the trees like a mournful dirge. The full moon, a silver coin in the inky sky, cast long, distorted shadows that danced across the walls, transforming familiar objects into grotesque shapes. Unbeknownst to Eleanor, the mice were gathering. Drawn by the Rat King's power, they streamed from every corner of the house, their numbers swelling, their eyes glowing with an eerie red light. The night of whispers had arrived. Eleanor clutched a broom, her only weapon against the nightmare engulfing her. It began subtly, a scurrying in the walls, a faint scratching beneath the floorboards. Then the first wave hit, a tide of mice, their tiny bodies a single writhing mass, poured from a hole in the wall she hadn't noticed before. They surged over the floor, an unstoppable torrent of fur and whiskers, their beady eyes burning with malevolent intent. Eleanor screamed, a high-pitched, desperate sound that echoed through the empty house. She swung the broom wildly, connecting with sickening thuds, but it was no use. For every mouse she swatted aside, a dozen more took its place. Her carefully curated world, her sanctuary of order and control, was dissolving into chaos before her very eyes. The air grew thick with the musky scent of rodents, their tiny claws scraping against wood and fabric. Eleanor could hear a low guttural growl that vibrated in her bones. The spectral form of the Rat King, its eyes blazing, materialized in the room. It moved with surprising speed, a whirlwind of shadows and glowing eyes. The mice turned their attention to Eleanor. They surged forward, a wave of fury and vengeance. Eleanor, her back against the wall, could only watch in terror. Fear gripped her heart. In a vice, she had become the hunted. As the mice swarmed over her, Eleanor understood the true meaning of terror. The storm subsided, leaving an eerie calm. Dawn broke, casting pale light through grimy windows. Inside, shadows lingered. Gone was the frantic scurrying. Only silence remained. A silence heavy with the unseen. Furniture lay in disarray, bearing scars of the night's battle. Dust, motes, danced in pale beams, undisturbed. A white mouse with glowing red eyes perched atop shredded fabric. It surveyed the scene with cold satisfaction. The Rat King retreated into the shadows, leaving its mark. The old house now stood empty, a silent tomb. The mice had their revenge. In the silence, echoes of their victory whispered,